Thank you so much. It's I can't see you, but I know you all look beautiful, so that's good. I also know you're nice. The reason I know is because I'm going to say something which at least one of you does not like, and you're not going to throw a stone at me. What assumptions do we make when we design interventions around cities? What do we even think a city is, right? So I'm not going to give a series of solutions here. My intention over the next 20 minutes is to upend some of the easy assumptions and the misconceptions that we have when we talk about cities and when we design so-called solutions. And to ask, can we rethink what a city is, what it means, and how a better future city could look like? I work at the Horticulture Institute. We're a small bunch of people that have a lot of fun doing stupid things on difficult topics. And our work is really to bring science to help in reframing sustainability policy and to putting people at the center, not because people are the most important, but because they cause this mess and they should start fixing it as well. And also because it needs some degree of legitimacy to involve people in the kind of radical solutions that we're thinking of. This is from one of the pieces that we've done at the Institute on 1.5-degree lifestyles, looking at potential contributions of changes in our ways of living to the Paris Agreement target. And as you would already see, these are countries mostly from the G20. What it shows is the lifestyle carbon footprint of each of these countries. If you're from Canada, my apologies already. And if you're from India, yeah, we got problems. So what you already see here is a set of countries, one to the left, that is quite high, has quite a high impact, and one to the right, that has a fairly low impact. Where are we now? The number you see above the bar chart is the average carbon footprint, lifestyle carbon footprint of a citizen. If we have to meet the Paris Agreement, we should be somewhere, all right, I hope this works. This is where we should be by 2030 and 2050. If you're wondering what the percentage reductions are, that's the magnitude of the challenge, right? And think of these countries on this side, they have to address this while also bringing up people's lifestyles to meet their basic needs. So we have a major problem here, and this is the second point I'm going to introduce. The point of climate change is a really badly told story, because it is a story of a few people like you and I making a mess for everyone else. Just 10% of the wealthiest people globally, especially people who live in cities, cause 50% of the greenhouse gases that we're talking about. It is exactly this problem that is accentuated in cities. So what you're looking at is cities in Canada. I love Canada, so if you're from Canada, don't throw stones at me here. What it shows is inequalities in cities, right? And so we're creating a sort of Mad Max situation, saying we're building cities because we only think of cities as construction sites. Why do we use consumption-based emissions instead of territorial-based emissions like the IPCC? Because it shows the social aspects when you analyze the data. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. First of all, why do people consume? No one really gets up in the morning saying, I'm going to go wreck the environment. People consume because they have essential needs, they have social expectations. They want to satisfy personal desires. I was going to put on a really nice jacket today to impress you, but I didn't have one, so I came in my shirt. So there's lots of reasons why people consume. But the reason why the solutions we always put out don't work is because we assume that people have all the agency to make all the changes. What you're looking at is what I call the ring of lifestyles. As you start from the middle, these are the motivations and the drivers that we have for consumption. And as you shift outward around your personal situation, it has a strong influence, but you have less and less control as you go outwards. You have less control over the kind of major infrastructure that is constructed, over the economy. It's not that you have no control, but you have fairly little control. And part of the problem is that the operating system of our society presently, which is, can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, okay. The operating system of our society is primarily the architecture that allows us to meet our needs is an economy that is overheating. And the challenge we have in cities nationally and globally, is to turn this blue, what is called the planetary boundaries. Whatever you think about it is a different question. This is why, in thinking about interventions in cities, there are three key interlinked determinants that if you touch just one, it doesn't go through. Awareness raising has not worked. We've known about the climate problem and biodiversity problem for decades, and we've focused primarily on raising awareness, and it's not worked. Why? Because we don't have the right facilitators in place. The economy is not cooperating, the politics is not cooperating, and because we're not putting in place the right infrastructure, we're creating lock-ins instead of creating infrastructure that would make it easier to live more sustainably. And we somehow have this perversion that cities are a permanent construction site, a test bed for high-tech and concrete, which is really not true, because cities are spaces of love and laughter. We don't treat it that way. The data I showed you earlier, I could try to break it down here. What you're seeing here is the lifestyle carbon footprint from transportation. And you would see primarily that we have a car culture. We're building cities for cars instead of for people, right? And so most of our interventions think first, how big is the garage gonna be? Or where is the road can you drive through the road that's going to get constructed here? But we have a number of fallacies that we carry along when we design these kind of interventions, and I'm going to talk about 4 of them. The first one here is the lock-in effect. When you construct cities for cars, essentially people will drive. So the more you build roads, the better you invest in roads, the more people will drive. It doesn't matter whether it's EVs or combustion fuel cars, right? The second one here is distancing. And this speaks a little bit to our obsession with electric cars. Now, we think we're going to solve our mobility problems with electric cars. But the science is so clear on this. The impact of EVs is strong environmentally, but socially it's even stronger in faraway places where we cannot see. And so we're perpetuating another set of problems. We're burden shifting instead of actually solving the problem, right? This shows analysis from the Netherlands, and what it clearly looks at is different scenarios for future mobility. And the conclusion is very obvious. We will need far fewer cars on roads. So begin to think of how you reduce the space that is currently being allocated for cars. And before you talk about recycling, what this shows you, it's done by Tom Grader from the International Resources Panel. The red you're seeing, and the reason why most of this is red, is because we're recycling less than 1% of everything red here, and between 1 and 10% of everything yellow. What this picture clearly tells you is, even if we had the infrastructure and the interest in recycling, there are physical limits to recycling. We must start thinking differently about the use of materials, especially when they are scarce. And the last but not the least fallacy I'm going to talk about is rebound effects. You would know that our cars, our houses, and so on have gotten so much more efficient over the last several years. And they're so efficient that they use very tiny fractions of the energy that they used to consume. But what this is clearly telling is that although we're getting more efficient, we're also building larger and larger homes. So all the efficiency gains that we've kind of gotten over the last several decades are wiped out by the volume of houses that we're building and the amount of consumption that we're doing. So if you're a mayor here, my apologies now, there's this sort of drive to constantly build new houses. I've not heard of any city that says, I'm going to do an audit of the housing stock in the city to see whether some can become residential instead of just giving licenses for new commercial buildings. Constructing new buildings is not only that it releases more greenhouse gas emissions, you have to use it for at least 80 years if it's 30% more efficient to be able to offset the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming out of here. Not to begin to mention the amount of resource that is wasted, right? So how should we think about cities? You can stop me if, yeah. How should we think about cities? How should we think about the interventions that we're crafting? I'm not going to talk here about solutions, but I would indicate some of the approaches that we're playing around with at the Institute. Not to suggest that they're working, but like I said, we like raising really difficult questions, some of which we cannot even answer. But play along with me. The first one is the role of zoning. We've zoned cities in a way that they're not only keeping the rich and the poor apart, they're forcing people to drive to work. You're driving from your home to the office, and your nanny is driving from a poor neighborhood back in the opposite direction to your home. Right? So we really need to rethink what zoning does. We need to create zones that are live, play, and work zones. We need to think of how to strengthen neighborhoods and communities. We need to think about things like tools, libraries, district heating, solutions that can be deployed at scale and that can bring people together rather than constantly individualizing people. And we need to rethink the idea of the commons. Because right now, our idea of the commons is creating spaces for cars and for parking, or for building houses for people that want to get second homes. Right? The second one is shifting from private luxury to public luxury. All the money we're investing in getting individualized wealth could better serve us and serve the environment and reduce social tensions if we invested it in public luxury. In this example, there's lots of things that are already happening in cities now. It is quite, the trends show that by 2035, most cities are going to be private car free, or at least will have major areas that are private car free. So a few examples are along the trajectory that you're seeing here. Some cities are beginning to announce now their intentions on where to go, copying what London did several years ago. Some cities are beginning to change limits and designating more low-speed areas, especially around schools, cultural hubs, and so on. Some are reviewing public transportation routes and infrastructure and seeing how to interject micro-mobility options in there and walking. Some are already taking on the idea of public luxury and converting roads or public parking spaces into playgrounds and parks and so on. And some that have been experimenting with these zones are beginning to scale up. So the idea is already getting, the momentum is already building around this, the idea of public luxury. The second one is to consider universal provisioning. So you've heard about universal basic services, universal basic income, universal basic dividends. All of these are grounded on the idea of universality. And if you live in Europe, well, except for those in North America and Africa, now if I come to think of it, most governments, it's terrible that I have to equate North America to Africa in terms of how they treat citizens, but there you go. Most governments in Europe and Asia have essentially realized that investing in health would save so much, but it's also such a fundamental need that you should not profit off of it. At least you should not profiteer off of it. So they provide universal health care, right? If you apply this and you extend it to other fundamental needs, you can also apply this to areas like housing. Why are we seeing protests in London? Because people are buying second and third homes to rent out, not because they want to live in them. So using housing as speculative financial investment, for example, is quite contrary to our values as a society. The same thing with public transportation, right? So how do you draw examples from other sectors to apply them more broadly across high impact sectors in cities? The second recommendation here, or approach that we're playing around with, I don't know why I numbered this 4. Yeah, is to begin to put a thermometer to how our cities or our citizens are feeling socially or acting socially. We measure so much on economics. We measure so much on greenhouse gas emissions and all of that. But we don't really have an index that indicates that citizens are happy or unhappy. We have subjective well-being expressions, but that's not really informing public policy. We also are seeing lots of social tensions growing, but we consider them a sort of unavoidable consequence of our need to constantly keep constructing for the already wealthy. Right? By the way, I don't have a problem with the wealthy. I would really like to be wealthy myself. It's just, if you're angry with what I'm saying, be angry with the slides, not with me. Right. So, and we need to start getting into municipal budgets to audit them, not just to see financial malpractices, but an understanding of whether it's shifting in the direction that is actually improving lifestyles, livelihoods, and well-being of citizens. The next one is building a social floor. Quite a lot of what I've shown would suggest that we should reduce greenhouse gas emissions, especially from the over-consuming. But a side effect of that and a consequence is that sometimes we put in place policies that actually drive those that are already in precarious situations to fall below the social floor. So in our policy designs, we need to think very carefully, how does that have unexpected consequences? And how do we make sure that we've built a social floor below which people should not fall and that they should live dignified lives? I'm going to leave it at that, but before I go, one less connected thing. We've just released a report on a new social contract. The idea being that the models of governance that we developed in the 18th, 19th, 20th century are no longer fit for purpose. And we really need to rethink governance. I think this is also applicable to cities. I will leave it at that, and thank you so very much.